All right, friends, welcome to our February. Oh, it's the 1st of February today. Free community class, A Sweet Taste of HeartScapes, where we get to gather and turn over topics related to the intersection of the system of Reiki and our daily life, and things that feel connected to those things based on just what's happening in the world, conversations that we're having in various community spaces and in the Reiki classes that I teach. The topics for this monthly class really come out of my interactions with you, with folks in my community, what seems to be of importance in a given moment. So it is dynamic in that way, and I'm always open to suggestions for future topics. So if there's something you are curious about, something about the system of Reiki from its Japanese origins, something about daily life and how it might be enhanced by a practice such as Reiki, or really anything else I can probably make irrelevant to the system of Reiki, you let me know. My name is Michaela, and I am the owner and operator of HeartScapes Reiki, which is where I am right now. And I love doing these classes. It's such a great way to be a little bit spontaneous, a little bit creative, and to connect with you. So today we are working with the topic of ritual. And we're going to link that certainly to the system of Reiki, but we're also going to look at the role of ritual in our daily lives a little bit more broadly and kind of work with a particular perspective about ritual. This is a word and a topic that can be defined and related to in a wide variety of ways. And so I'm going to be sharing one way of relating to ritual, the one that has meaning in my practice, one that I find valuable. It is not the only way to relate to ritual. And so, there may be other ways in which you would interpret this. That is perfectly fine. We might get a chance to turn that over a little bit as well. But it's a topic that really has come up strongly in the classes that I teach. I teach a year-long program, a deep dive immersion into the system of Reiki from the perspective of its Japanese origins, along with a variety of other classes, single day classes, shorter classes alongside that, along with one-on-one teaching for folks who want to do it in that way. And for whatever reason, for the last year or so, there's been moment after moment in these spaces where it's like there's this moment that comes through where whatever it was that we were doing, whatever curriculum I'm teaching or whatever lesson we're in or practice we're in, it's like we need to pause and set that aside for a moment and acknowledge something that's happening in the moment, something that was, brought in spontaneously by the participants or something that's just happening in the space around us. And it's totally outside of what was planned for that class, and yet it becomes the most important thing in the room. And what I've observed over time is that in those moments, the practice of ritual is what steps in to help guide us through those spontaneous moments, those moments when we didn't plan for this, we don't know exactly what we're supposed to do with this, and yet here it is, it's the most important thing in the room. And what I came to realize is that, number one, these moments happen in our lives all the time. That change and transformation and moments when we feel stuck or confused or like we can't go forward with the plans as they were set happen. And we need something to help us move through that moment into the other side. And that something is what I would call ritual. And so it also occurred to me that there is a skill set involved with being able to step into that liminal space of that moment and to create a spontaneous ritual to respond to the moment, move through it, and then move on with our day. And that's the type of ritual that I'm curious to explore today in this brief touch point with this topic and in a longer deep dive class that I'm offering on February 25th. It's a half-day class where we're going to really dive into building this skill set of spontaneous ritual with a little more time, a little bit more intention. I'll tell you more about that class at the end, and folks who are joining me for this circle will be offered a bit of a discount on that class. So I will say more about that at the end. But before I go any further with this topic, I want to invite us to really drop into this space together. We often begin these classes with just a little brief meditation to help us open up to the topic at hand. So that is what we're going to do. So I'm going to invite you to join me in this practice. It'll be brief. So wherever you are, just invite you to settle your body into a position that feels well supported, that feels easeful, supported, and also alert as well as you can. We're finding that sweet spot where we're not tense, we're not rigid, holding ourselves tense and rigid, but we're also not slumped down and so relaxed that our body is contracting. We want to be in a easeful, upright position. Allowing the supportive structures below us to hold us well so that we can rest into this practice for a moment. And Annie, welcome. We're just getting started after a bit of an introduction with a short practice. And so from this stable, easeful position, just invite you to take a couple of breaths and invite your belly to relax and to be soft as much as it can in this moment. The muscles of the shoulders and the chest and our bellies are often places that we hold tight, that we might hold tension. Particularly the belly, we often want to keep that a little bit armored up to protect those soft places below. And so in this moment, just take a couple of breaths to invite the muscles of your belly to relax so that your breath can move freely in and out of your body, that your body can expand gently with your inhale and contract gently with your exhale. And as your body comes into this posture for practice, we'll bring our breath into this posture by allowing the breath to move in and down, flowing with ease into the belly. Not efforting to breathe deeply, but allowing the softness of your belly and the support below your body to make more space for the breath to move freely. As much as you can in this moment. And then with our body and our breath coming together in this posture for practice, I can invite you to bring your mind into this posture by resting your attention on the sensation of your breath as it moves in and down. Allowing the movement of the breath to draw your attention in from all the places you've spent it today, to rest your focus on the simple movement of your breath in and down, drawing your attention inward, all the way down into your low belly. And for the next few rounds of breath, practice resting your attention, focusing your mind at the point just below your belly button and deep into the center of your body. This energy center known as the Hara in Japan. It's the first diamond, the first stop on the energetic map that we utilize within this system. So let's just spend a couple of breaths resting our attention here. Bringing your mind into this nourishing darkness in the center of your body, center of your energy. You may notice a sensation of deeper grounding as this energy center is connected to the earth. It can help bring a sensation of groundedness and of homecoming as we rest here in the center of our body, in the center of our energy. Let's just take 3 more breaths here together. Now, from this rooted, grounded place, this homecoming place, I invite you to consider the question, what does ritual mean to me? What does ritual mean to me? And what is my relationship with the practice of ritual at this time, in this moment? What is my relationship to the practice of ritual? Considering this question without any judgment, just curiosity. And then gathering up what you've noticed, just taking a moment to give yourself a gesture of completion before coming back into this circle together. Welcome back. So I'd love to hear from at least a couple of you, just any response that came up from these questions of what does ritual mean to you, and what, if anything, is your relationship to the practice of ritual? And, really holding that again with curiosity and non-judgment. There's no right answer. It's really an opportunity to bring our attention to how we're relating to this topic, because we don't necessarily think about it on a regular basis. So you can drop that in the chat. You can come off mute. There's a brave soul who will share your voice. Just share what came up for you in those questions.
I think something that came up for me was just that I think there are some habits that I have are kind of rituals for, you know, calming down at the end of a very long day. But something that also came up was then what's the difference between ritual and routine? And at what point, because routine feels a little regimented more so than a ritual does. So where does that distinction lie, and how do I make that difference? I'm not quite sure.
That's perfect, because that's part of our curriculum today. Anybody else? What came up for you? Anybody else have that curiosity? What's the difference between ritual and routine or habit? Or maybe for you, what is the difference? Yeah, Annie has the same question. Awesome. Cool. Well, I think that's a really good place to start. And as we move along, please do feel free to share thoughts, questions in the chat as we go through, or if some other piece of this that you want to share from that opening comes through, please feel free to share it. So This is, I think, a really great place to start, because oftentimes when I ask people for examples of rituals that might be present in daily life, oftentimes the examples given are really in that area, that territory of habit or routine. So brushing your teeth, calming down after a day's work with kind of the same cup of tea and sitting by the window, the way in which we get ready in the morning or settle down in the evening. And the distinction that I'll make here, and again, the definitions around these things vary a lot. And there's a lot of interchangeability that people use between ritual, habit, and I would add tradition inside of that. And so for our working definition here, I'm going to say that a ritual is something that helps us move into and navigate liminal space. Liminal space is the space in between. In a formal ritual, for example, a ritual of coming of age, we would say that the person has left the age that they were. Perhaps they're no longer a child, but they have not yet entered adulthood. And there's going to be this ritual. Perhaps it lasts for hours, perhaps it lasts for days, for weeks, however that has been conceived, that moves that person and their community through that liminal space, that in-between space where you're no longer what you were, but you're not yet what you will be. That's a very clear example of liminal space, but we enter and exit liminal space all the time in small ways throughout our day. And what a ritual does is give us an opportunity to pause, to notice, to pay attention. It kind of helps to focus our attention on what matters in this moment so that we don't miss it. It helps to engage our intention. In that moment, we can set an intention for how we want to experience this time. And it brings in our imagination, because ritual often includes symbolism, metaphor, stories, songs, beauty, art. It engages our senses. It often allows the symbols and experiences of our senses to stand in for experiences and to help make meaning of them. And so we have these three elements of our attention. What are we paying attention to in this moment? Our setting our intentions. What do we intend to experience in this moment? And then drawing on our imagination on how to fill that moment, how to create meaning inside of that space. And then following our intuition about how to respond spontaneously in the moment. So if we take that example of the routine, let's say brushing our teeth. We do it probably at about the same time every day. We probably don't think a whole lot about it, right? We're probably rushing through it to get on with our morning. Our mind is probably wandering to whatever we have to do that day, or it's still thinking about the dream we just had, or we're still, pissed off about something that happened yesterday, or we're excited or concerned about something that will happen tomorrow. And so in that context, this is a routine. It's a habit. It's something we do without thinking. It helps put structure around our life so that we can get done the things we need to get done without having to spend a lot of mental energy on it, right? I mean, what if we had to really focus our attention and concentrate with all of ourself on every little thing that we did throughout the day, right? It would be exhausting. So we create these habits, these routines that allow us to move through the day, accomplish what needs to get done without spending a whole lot of energy focusing on it. So I would say in that context, brushing our teeth is not a ritual. However, could there be a time when brushing our teeth becomes a ritual? I was thinking about this as I was in another routine this morning in the shower, as you often are spacing out. I'm like, how are we going to talk about ritual today? And how do we distinguish between ritual and routine? So I imagined a scenario that is similar to scenarios that I've worked with clients around, where they become aware that in the course of their life, they perhaps haven't always taken really good care of themselves. Perhaps they have a habit of putting everybody else's needs before their own and always putting their needs in the back seat. And this is accumulated over time. And now they're at a point where they feel depleted. They feel like the sparkle of life is gone, and they're just living to please other people. And they really are longing to bring back that sense of self-love, that sense of life having a charge to it, having a spark to it, because we're following things that make us happy. They want to bring joy back into their life, and they want to learn how to put their needs as a priority rather than always in the background. In that scenario, a ritual of caring for ourselves, which is what brushing our teeth is, or taking a shower, or feeding ourselves a good meal, or getting a good night's sleep. These simple routines that we do every day can become a ritual, because now we have a liminal space. I no longer am a person who's going to always put my needs in the background, but I'm not yet the person who fluently and easily prioritizes myself in ways that show compassion to myself as well as compassion to the people in my life. I'm not yet there. And so I'm in this liminal space. And inside of this liminal space, I want to really pay attention to what's happening. I want to be with the discomfort, because liminal space is uncomfortable almost universally, right? Because we're no longer in familiar territory, but we haven't yet settled into the new territory. So it's uncomfortable. Ritual helps us navigate that discomfort, be with it. And so, in this discomfort of no longer being that person who puts themselves in the back, not yet the person who puts themselves as a priority, we're going to take a moment when we brush our teeth. We're going to take a breath. We're going to pay attention to what we're doing. We're going to keep our attention focused in this moment, not jump to the past, not jump to the future. We're going to experience the sensation of that sharp, minty toothpaste and the impact it has on our senses. We're going to feel the sensation of the toothbrush moving around in our mouth, and allow that to be a sensual experience, perhaps, at least one that brings our attention to this moment. We're going to have a moment of gratitude for the way in which this simple routine cares for us, for our health, for our longevity, for how awake we feel in the morning. I know I feel more awake after brushing my teeth, right? We're going to notice that sensation of aliveness that comes when that minty, burst happens in our sinuses, right? There's that deeper breath that we can take when we have that sensory experience. We might pause when we're done brushing our teeth and make eye contact with ourselves in the mirror, reaffirm that intention. Even if it's hard today, I'm going to prioritize myself, right? Really see ourselves in the mirror instead of just looking past ourselves. And we're going to have that moment of gratitude that in this moment, I'm choosing to care for myself. And so in that moment, brushing our teeth moves from routine into ritual. I'm going to pause to check this question, and I just want to make sure that that distinction is clear. So Jay asks, could, in your opinion, developing rituals around self-care become essentially intentional liminal space daily as we transition from outward focus to personal care and self-care? Oh, I love it. Yeah, I mean, I think for sure. There's, you're kind of speaking to this multi-directional relationship that we can have with liminal space. Oftentimes, liminal space opens up for us and we haven't chosen it, right? Perhaps somebody passes away, or we lose a job, or we reach a certain age or stage of our development where that liminal space opens up. Other times we have, we know that it's coming, right? We've chosen to leave a job, or we're retiring, or we've chosen to get married, or to leave a marriage, right? There's these times when we choose to step into that liminal space. And those are big examples, right? You're speaking more to the day-to-day. Can we choose to step into liminal space as part of our self-care? And I would say as part of our working inside the territory of growth, which includes discomfort, but also pleasure, right? That those two things can really work together when we're intentional. So I think my short answer is yes, absolutely, we can do that. And maybe we can unpack what that looks like in another conversation offline. Um, so I want to just pause there and just make sure that those examples kind of made sense in the context of that question about habit, routine versus ritual. You can give a thumbs up on your emojis, or you can chat me, or you can come off mute. All right, we got some thumbs ups. Great. So just reiterating our working definition of ritual and the 4 components that I just named. So our working definition of ritual is that this is a conscious practice that allows us to focus our attention in the moment, navigating liminal space, those in-between spaces that happen in teeny tiny moments and happen in big significant moments throughout our life, and that allow us to engage our senses in honoring that moment so that we can change, grow, or transform according to that moment. So in that moment with the teeth brushing as a ritual, right? Even in just those 5 minutes of brushing our teeth with those intentions in mind, we'll experience growth. We'll experience change. We'll get a little bit bigger in our ability to care for ourselves and prioritize ourselves, right? We'll make a little more room because we have taken that moment to work through those 4 things. As I said, where do we focus our attention? What intention do we hold for that moment? Drawing on our imagination to fill that moment with meaning for ourselves, and using our intuition to move through that spontaneous space that we didn't plan for, perhaps, but has presented itself nonetheless. I wanted to give another example of spontaneous ritual because that's where I have a lot of curiosity right now and where I'm focusing. So there's rituals that we plan, right? And we design and we take our time to put together: a wedding, a funeral, a graduation ceremony, a birthday party. These are the ones that are most culturally recognized for us right now. But I'll give you another example, just from my own recent experience of an intentional ritual. The studio that I'm in right now, it's the 2nd story of my home, and I had the privilege and the honor of being able to design the space with the intention of being my studio. It was part of a much larger remodel. Like half the house got taken down. So we went down to dirt on half the house. And because of that opportunity, I realized that we could hold some sort of intentional ritual around building the foundation of what would become my Reiki studio. And so I gathered some quartz from a local source, and I called some friends, and we did a very simple but very much planned out ritual of setting those pieces of quartz into the 4 corners of the foundation of this building before they poured the concrete. It was simple, it was quick, but it was very intentional, and it had all of those pieces that I just named. So that's an intentional ritual. A spontaneous ritual might look like a moment that happened in class recently, where my co-teacher had lost his cat. He has a beloved cat, and she had passed away, and he was still in the grief of that experience. It was pretty recent. And he was talking about the cat in the context of whatever we were teaching in that moment. He calls her his 4th Reiki teacher. And the grief just came up in that moment, right? Wasn't planning on it, hadn't built space to kind of make a moment to kind of honor this moment of grief. But there it was. It became the most important thing in that moment. And I observed the way that he created a spontaneous ritual around that moment in order to be in the liminal space of that grief without squashing it down or rushing through it. Because think of times when you've been in some sort of public setting and some intense emotion comes up. Many of us have had this experience, or we've witnessed others having this experience, right? We weren't planning to have this intense emotion. We're in public, something whole else different is happening, but all of a sudden we have an intense feeling of joy, of sadness, of grief, of anger, of fear. What's our impulse in that moment? Oftentimes, the impulse is to suck it up, right? Pull it in, stuff it down, don't express it, don't detract from what's happening, don't call attention to yourself, right? But there's several really important negative consequences of doing that. Firstly, physiologically, this is a sure way to build up illness in our body, holding on to our emotions and not working them through. In that moment, that can cause us to feel really bad in our body, in our mind. We're not honoring something that's coming up, right? So there can be physiological consequences. Also, we're not inviting the people that we're with to be in that moment with us, right? There's something that's happening that's important, but nobody else gets to experience it. And therefore, any shared learning or growth that might happen in that moment does not become available. And so in this moment, when this grief came up, Joe knew that he needed to not stuff it. He needed to make some space for it. And I just watched him create a spontaneous ritual. He just grabbed a couple of objects from the shelf. If you were here, I'd ask him why those particular objects. I think they were more or less at random. But what they did was give him something to focus his attention on. So he kind of spontaneously created a little altar in front of himself with these objects. Just took a moment to focus his attention on that space, call it back from whatever it was that we were doing in that moment, take a few breaths. And then in that stillness, he remembered a song that his Reiki teacher had taught him that was in the context of grieving somebody else. So he remembered this song. It was associated with the feeling he was having of grief. It was associated with his Reiki teacher, which was what we were there to do. And he just sang this song in this moment, took a few breaths, and then we just moved along with the class, right? And so he got to ventilate that feeling of grief, give it some space, right? Honor it, let it be present instead of trying to hide it. We all got to step into that liminal space with him, which can be uncomfortable, right? We all benefit from having practices that allow us to feel uncomfortable, right? Because when something spontaneous like that comes up that was unplanned and that has an emotion attached to it, right? We're not always well equipped to be with that, right? To be in compassion, in compassion, to be with the passion, the pain, the intensity of another person, right? The system of Reiki does a beautiful job of building up our capacity to be with discomfort. It's one of the reasons I'm so devoted to it. And so the people in that room were able to be with it, let him have his process, not take responsibility for it, not try to make him better, not try to fix him, not trying to hurry him through that experience, but just be with it, be in compassion. And then it moved through and we moved on, right? But we were able to pause right in that moment and honor that experience. Later, that the observations that we made about that became part of the teaching material, right? We drew on that experience to help us learn how better to be in our Reiki practice. And that's just one example of a process that I see happening over and over and over again, and that I really invite us to intentionalize and to give ourselves a little bit of capacity, a little bit of skill, so that when we notice a moment like that come up in our life, that we're ready to respond to it. And it can be a teeny tiny little response, or it can be a bigger response, right? We don't always have the space and the time to like create an altar and sing a song and do a thing, right? But a spontaneous ritual can be very tiny. It can be very private. It can be just for us. It can just be a moment of pausing, bringing our attention to what's right in front of us, witnessing and acknowledging the importance of this moment, and that it's different than what was on the agenda before it happened. Focusing our attention on it, setting an intention to honor whatever's happening here, bringing our imagination to bear in that moment, and following our intuition as to what we should do and how we should proceed. Spontaneous ritual. I'm going to pause again, have a little tea, see if there's any other questions. before we move on to some strategy for doing this. I'm curious if any examples came up for any of you of moments such as that, either moments that you remember that perhaps passed by and didn't get acknowledged, or moments like that where there was a pause and an acknowledgement. Any other small examples? I'd love to hear it if you want to drop them in the chat or come off mute. Right.
I guess something is just sometimes I personally feel like I don't take the time to acknowledge just how exhausted we can get for a day. And it just caught me unawares in the middle of a class, and I was like, I just need to sit down and take a deep breath.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great example of a very like a micro moment, right? Of like the awareness, I'm exhausted. How often do we just push through it? You know, we don't acknowledge it. We just push through. I'll sleep later. The exhaustion goes to the back. Don't have time for that. Instead, you noticed it. You're like, oh, here it is. I have to keep moving with my day, but for 25 seconds, I'm going to pause. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to acknowledge what's happening. I'm going to be in the discomfort of it, right? I mean, what a moment of liminal space to like let the exhaustion be in your awareness, sit down, be with it. I mean, that's got to be uncomfortable, right? Take those few breaths. And then I would imagine you probably moved on with your day and continued with whatever you had to get done, right? That's a really beautiful example of a spontaneous ritual. And a way in which we can bring our attention to a particular moment and follow intuition. I need to sit, I need to take a breath, and then I can move on, right? Great example. Okay. So I want to share a structure, a framework that I use for designing ritual. And I use the same structure whether I'm spending a lot of time very intentionally, you know, creating something that I will then execute with a group of people or with my own self. You know, in other words, a very intentionally planned ritual. And I use the same process in a much quicker kind of intuitive way in those moments of spontaneous ritual. Like many things, like most things that are most powerful in my life and in my practice, this is both simple, very simple, and it can be challenging to remember to do it and to practice it enough that it starts to come naturally, right? Like the system of Reiki or any other practice that we might have, they often are most powerful when they're very simple, very accessible, very graceful and elegant. This is what I love about the system of Reiki, particularly from its Japanese origins. And yet it takes diligence and repetition and practice to get that system inside of ourselves, in our habit, right? To make it be something that we can draw on in a moment without having to think about it much. And the same is true for this structure that I'm going to share. And so it's something that we can practice intentionally. If we do that enough, it is able to come to us spontaneously. Okay, I'm going to do this piece first, and then if there's time, I realize that there's a few pieces about, I wanted to name some of the rituals that exist in the system of Reiki, but I'll do that after. So this practice just consists of 4 simple questions that are questions for reflection, planning questions, prep questions. And again, we can move through them quickly, or we can spend quite a bit of time with them. In the class that I'm teaching on the 25th, we're going to spend quite a bit of time in kind of real life examples going through these prep questions in a very detailed way. Today, what we have time for is just to introduce them to you, and you can play with them on your own. So the first question is, what are we orienting towards? Or what is our North Star? So if we think about that liminal space, if we think about, you know, a map, and that territory on the map that hasn't been explored yet, right? That's the liminal space. We know about this territory. We've explored this. Maybe we live here, and we know that there's something on the other side of this territory that we want to get to, but there's this deep valley, perhaps, that we have not explored, and this is the liminal space. We don't know what to expect in there. In order to navigate through that deep valley that we aren't familiar with, we can imagine following a North Star, something that is fixed in its position. So if we have to go around an obstacle, we can still orient back towards that star, something that we can continue to follow as we move through this liminal space. And so what is it that we are orienting towards in this ritual, in this moment? In that toothbrushing example, the North Star might be prioritizing my self-care, right? That's what I'm orienting towards. And so this little tiny ritual, this 5 minutes of brushing my teeth, right, is one little piece of that deep valley that I haven't explored yet, because I'm not yet the kind of person who prioritizes my self-care, right? But I'm going to orient towards that. So that's my North Star. In the example of my teaching partner's cat and that moment of grief, his North Star might have been something like, I want to honor this grief and move through it so that we can continue on with what we're here to do. But I want to make some space for this grief rather than stuff it. I want to honor my cat. I want to bring her into this space, right? I want her to be here with us, right? There's all kinds of different things that we can include in our North Star, but the simple question is, what is it that we're orienting towards? Next, now that we know what we're orienting towards, if we draw on our imagination, again, that's one of our 4 essential tools in creating spontaneous ritual. If we draw on our imagination and we imagine ourselves having achieved that, we've reached that North Star, we're on the other side of that gulf, that liminal space. How is that going to feel in my body? So this is a little bit of a sensory practice, and it can take some practicing, and it can take maybe bringing some other practices in if we're not accustomed to imagining or thinking about how an experience or how a set of feelings is going to feel as physical sensations in our body. Oftentimes we might say something like, I'll feel proud of myself. Okay, what does proud of yourself feel like in your body? Maybe it feels like your chest is opening up and you have that feeling of your heart swelling with pride. Maybe it feels like butterflies in your stomach. Maybe it feels like relaxed energy. Maybe it feels like rest, right? So we want to get in the habit of translating thoughts and emotions into physical feelings in our body, because that can help us know when we have arrived, right? Because if we can identify a sensation that we're having that cues us in to that desired result, then when we feel that sensation, then that cues us in to know that we've arrived. Or if we're not feeling that sensation, we know we haven't arrived yet. So how would this feel in my body if I've arrived at my North Star? Once we have a sense of that, perhaps we've journaled with it. It's always a good idea, especially if you're planning, if you're doing more of an intentional planning with this process, journaling each of these responses is really valuable. So once we know how we want to feel, how we're going to feel when we get to our destination, when we've reached our North Star, we want to know what provisions we need to carry with us. If we're loading up a wagon that we're going to take through that valley, through that liminal space, what provisions do we want to have with us? Another way to ask that is, what do we need inside of this container? If we think about a ritual as a container, right? It's something that creates a space around the moment that we're having. It creates a space around the experience that we're having. It holds away distractions and other concerns for a little bit of time. So a ritual is a container. What do we need here inside of this container? That can include physical objects. I need my toothbrush. I need my toothpaste. I need a sink. I need water. It might include feelings, right? I need gratitude in this space. I need grief in this space. I need honesty in this space. It might include moments or experiences Again, staying with the teeth brushing example, I need a moment where I look myself in the eye in the mirror. That moment needs to happen inside of this ritual. I need to look myself in the eye and recommit to this goal of taking care of myself. So that needs to be in the container, right? Maybe there's some other person that needs to be in the container. I need a witness for this moment. That was true in the class with honoring the moment of grief with the cat. There were witnesses. And the fact that there were witnesses there was an important part of the ritual, even though it was unplanned, right? I might need symbols. I might need things that symbolically represent something that's not here. So perhaps those objects that Joe grabbed, that he created a little ritual or a little altar with, perhaps those objects reminded him of his cat. And so they stood in, they symbolized this being that wasn't physically present. Perhaps there's things that symbolize intangible things, right? Maybe, I have on my altar right now a really large piece of black tourmaline. And sometimes I've used that piece of black tourmaline it's a black stone, to represent feelings like grief or feelings like mystery or the unknown or space, things that have a kind of a darkness to them, right? That I can't literally put in the middle of the room, but I can put this stone that represents it. So what do I need in the container? What provisions do I need in my wagon as I caravan through this liminal space? And this is where we really allow our imagination to take over, right? And again, this takes practice. When we do this in the longer class, we're going to spend some time in meditation, really working with our imagination and allowing it to open gently to this question of what needs to be in the container, letting that be perhaps surprising, right? Because we often, with our conscious mind, don't well know what it is that would best serve the moment, right? There's this intuitive, imaginative part of ourself that can pull that information through. We'll spend more time with that. So once we have that list of things and we gather those things together, then we allow our intuition to move us through that ritual. Again, it can be incredibly simple, right? For Joe, it was place these objects on the floor, take a breath, sing a song, we're done. That was the ritual. For Himali in her class, it was acknowledge the exhaustion, sit down, take a breath. And maybe that was the extent of the ritual, right? So we enact the ritual following our intuition about what wants to happen. There's a piece here in this moment around being okay with discomfort, being okay with not knowing the right thing to do, being okay with making mistakes, being okay with maybe feeling a little bit foolish when we're like, okay, I've gathered all of these things. Now what do we do? Right? I have definitely had that moment. I had that moment in teaching a class the other day. I knew that there was some sort of ritual that needed to happen. I didn't quite have the pieces together. And there was this really awkward moment where I'm like, well, I'm not quite sure what we're doing right now, but we're going to carry on anyway, And so there's a piece here when we're talking about now, enacting the ritual that really serves us to, again, have kind of built up our resilience to discomfort, to not knowing the next right thing to do, to making a mistake, to feeling foolish. So that's another piece that we'll work on in the deeper dive. Finally, the last question that we can contemplate before we enact the ritual, we can contemplate it while we're in the midst of it, and we can contemplate it once it has been complete. And it's a question that, again, allows our imagination to root us into the importance of the moment and to mark the importance of that moment, because it's so easy to just move on from these things, right? Even if we take the time to have a ritual, it can be easy to just move on from them and not retain the significance of it, right? Not retain the significance of recognizing the exhaustion and taking a moment to breathe into that exhaustion. And that question is simply, why does this matter? Why does it matter? that I have set this, that I've set this North Star, that I've gathered these things, that I've enacted this moment? What's the point of it? Why would I spend any time and energy at all paying attention to this? And this is a question that often will have kind of an obvious answer, maybe a logistical answer, maybe a surface level answer, but maybe also a very important one. But there's often also deeper layers. And this is why we might want to return to that question over time, really, to help us to uncover those deeper layers of why does it matter that we take the time to acknowledge these moments? What does that do for our life? Asking ourselves this question allows us to track the impact of doing this over time, right? Because a single moment of acknowledging a moment with a ritual might not have a lasting effect on us. But if we make it part of how we live our life, how we move through, then it will impact us more and more, deeper and deeper on a more lasting level. And I know this from experience because it's how I've been operating my life for some time. So that is the structure that I have found to be very helpful for navigating these moments, whether they're spontaneous or planned. I said that I would name a couple of the places where ritual shows up in the system of Reiki, just to thread us back to our original point. There's a very obvious place where this shows up, which is in the practice of Reiju. The Reiju is the fifth element of 5 elements in the system of Reiki from its Japanese origins. It is what is often called in English an initiation or an attunement. However, the translation of the word Reiju is spiritual blessing. It's very explicitly a ritual in all of the ways that we've been discussing, of marking a moment of importance, creating some space around it, all of these things we've just been talking about. It's very explicitly a ritual inside of the system of Reiki. However, I would propose that anytime we are practicing, thanks so much, Yasmin. I'm glad you joined us. You'll get the recording if you want to catch those last few minutes. Anytime that you are in a practice of any sort, we can treat it as a ritual. And I would suggest that we should treat it as a ritual. I had this conversation with a student yesterday that she shared that, oftentimes the practice of hands-on Reiki for her, especially in relaxed moments like with her family, can sometimes be something that she's not really paying a lot of attention to, that she's, doing the session without, and maybe her mind is spacing out and going somewhere else. And we talked about the importance of really taking that moment to focus her attention on what's happening, shifting it from a habit into a ritual by paying attention and resting her attention on that moment, on the specialness of that moment. So I think those are the pieces that I will name, that we have time to name now. For those of you who registered for this, some of you might be here through a meetup group that I'm in. If you've registered for it, you're going to receive an email follow-up that'll have the recording of this session, some of the resources that I talked about, and information about that class on the 25th, as well as an invitation to register for it at $10 off. You'll have that coupon code. If you're here from Meetup, I think I'll just go back into that Meetup group and post that information there. But you can also reach out to me if you want to receive it via email. I really appreciate all of you being here live. I appreciate those of you watching this recording. Replay crew, we love you. And we will be back next month. Our topic for March is joy, is how we engage the system of Reiki as a practice of joy finding, of joy experiencing, of finding that deep well of joy that lives inside of all of us, but can sometimes be challenging to touch. And we'll probably talk about ritual a little bit in that context as well. So join us for that if you can. Thank you so much for being with me today. I appreciate your time and attention. And wherever you journey from this place, may you be very deeply provisioned for it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.